All right, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to get started. My name is Katie Stanton, and I'm Programming and Operations Director for the Urban Manufacturing Alliance. Before we dive into today's programming, I'd like you all to take a moment and think a little bit about our topic today. That's advancing equity and inclusion in manufacturing, credentialing, and technology. And put it in your own context. So how is technology changing your work around manufacturing, whether it be in your own organization or your community or with the folks you serve? And if you feel inspired, we'd love for you to post what you're thinking in the chat. So as you're doing that, as you're putting it in your own context before we hear from our panelists today, just a reminder that we'll also be taking questions at the end of the session. First, we'll be hearing 4 rapid share style presentations from organizations that are a part of our industry and inclusion cohort or on the program's advisory board. And then we'll be going into a moderated discussion, which will include questions from you. So please type your questions, not in the chat, but rather in the Q&A function. Okay, with that, just as a quick refresher on who UMA is, we are a national coalition of manufacturing practitioners working together to grow more equitable economies in cities by building robust and sustainable and inclusive urban manufacturing sectors. We believe that manufacturing is a wealth building strategy for communities through production jobs that are tied to career pathways, through ownership, and through entrepreneurship. And we work with our coalition of over 900 practitioners across 200 cities to remove barriers to those jobs, to ownership, to entrepreneurship, so that we can create more prosperous communities and cities through urban manufacturing. All right, to set the stage just a little, and Eva, you can go to the next slide, please. I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge just how much manufacturing has changed in only a generation. So I think we all sort of have this familiarity, but historically, manufacturing was a great stabilizer with fairly easy entry points for folks without formal training or education. It was deeply embedded in neighborhoods, and you could get training for the job on the job and find yourself with a family-sustaining wage pretty quickly. But a lot of these jobs historically were tied to commodity production. And so in this familiar story, as automation and globalization increased, these jobs disappeared and left a lot of pain and suffering in its wake. And we also want to acknowledge that that pain and suffering was felt disproportionately by communities of color. Yet with all of these painful shifts within manufacturing, we still currently see so much promise in the sector. And that's really what our industry and inclusion cohort and work is all about. Because manufacturing didn't wholly disappear, but instead maybe it got smaller or its value chains got more diffuse and spread out. Oftentimes companies hunkered down and many companies have survived now through multiple economic downturns. And through all of that, manufacturing still generates a strong local economic impact. But the way manufacturing looks and feels now is absolutely different than it did 10 years ago, let alone 50 years ago. Now it's steeped in technology and design and craft and creativity. And it's essentially the definition of innovation, introducing new modes of operating, new ideas, and creating new products as a result. Another added challenge is that finding qualified workers consistently ranks as a top challenge for manufacturers. And some estimates say that between now and 2028 or so, there will be about 2.4 million job openings in manufacturing. And unlike in the past where you knew about these jobs and this work through the FBI network, so the father, brother, in-law network, which is a very exclusive approach in itself, if you can only get a job, if you know someone who has a job, now these jobs are much harder to find and then much harder to access. So putting all that context together, the challenge that we're collectively facing now is how to continue to connect communities to these well-paying jobs as the skills they need to access them are so rapidly changing in the face of technology. And we should also remember that sometimes it's the very communities that the manufacturing exodus hit the hardest that are most cautionary around getting a manufacturing job today and makes it a very risky proposition. And so that question is what the Urban Manufacturing Alliance and the Century Foundation, with support from the Lumina Foundation, came together to face with our industry and inclusion cohort. So how can manufacturing solve our national recruitment challenge, forge a more racially inclusive future for manufacturing, and build training pathways that support current jobs and jobs of the future? So I'm going to turn to Andy Stetner, who's a Senior Policy Fellow at the Century Foundation, to give you additional context around our cohort and why this moment is such a critical one for our work. Andy?
Hey, good morning. I'm Andrew Stetner. I'm a Senior Fellow at the Century Foundation based in Washington, D.C. And I want to thank today's wonderful panelists, including members of our cohort, our advisory board, and for everyone who joined into this webinar to learn from these fabulous leaders. So I'm just going to be brief in setting the stage. So we've been focused on manufacturing as part of our organization's focus on building a more equitable economy. Our High Wage America tour started in 2017 with UMA and other organizations. And we visited heartland cities like Cleveland with Senator Sherrod Brown and Chicago with State Senator Alice Walker, and published 9 reports about communities battled by deindustrialization. And the overall takeaway is these communities were not looking backward to what manufacturing was, but really hopefully to the future about what manufacturing could deliver to their communities. And these were places that, like Youngstown, Ohio, who went from America's 50th largest city to having the largest concentration of Black poverty in America. But today, who is the center of the America Makes Institute, and when we have several of other manufacturing USA institutes on the call today, and they're building a 21st century 3D printing, or what is called additive manufacturing cluster in their community, from there to Pittsburgh. We went through a stage of manufacturing shrinkage through 2010, where nearly 5 million manufacturing jobs were lost. Despite the pandemic, which shaved nearly 500,000 jobs off of growth, we have built manufacturing back. 1.5 million manufacturing jobs have come back, but it's in a radically changed workplace, like Katie mentioned. The use of industrial robots, for example, doubled from 2000 to 2017. And that's really just the beginning of how technology is changing the way that goods are produced here in America and across the world. Go to the next slide, Eva. So we're at what I think is a pretty important moment for the future of manufacturing, perhaps the most important moment for the future of manufacturing and equity ever. We are at a time when we have a new president-elect who has developed a plan to build our economy back better, focused on rebuilding manufacturing as a top priority. But embedded within that pledge to rebuild manufacturing, both for very much now about the immediate needs, producing millions of vials and syringes and other medical equipment, but also more broadly as we rebuild our economy. That plan has a very specific focus on women and people of color, owned manufacturers, and the communities that they live in. And that work on manufacturing is part of a broader promise from the Biden-Harris team to systematically advance racial equity in our economy. But what we'll hear from our panelists today is that it's not easy. It's easy to put those words on paper in a campaign document. It's a lot harder to make them work in communities and companies. And so our goal here today and into the future with all of you on the call and with this great cohort of organizations is to help this new administration get the policy, partnerships, and intentions right, both through policy, but also about how corporations and communities can join in for this drive for a more equitable future in manufacturing. Go to the next slide. So we've been, I can't tell you that we have learned so much in this cohort. This is our group of experts that LIFT was able to bring together, both from the factory floor and education and organizations to share their experiences in helping people get onto those workforce career pathways and then advance through them into management. We have a young Siemens executive who started as the first African-American engineer in his department in the Detroit area. And so these are the pathways that we're trying to get people on through this program. So yeah, and so this is a list of our whole cohort. We had hoped to visit all of these cities and to really give life to their experiences and their factories, their classrooms. But nonetheless, despite the pandemic, we learned so much. We will, out of this cohort, publish a blueprint for action for policymakers and communities, and a profile of each of the organizations in our community. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of a real movement around equity in manufacturing, starting with, but not ending with, getting people access to careers in this sector. So with that, I'm just really, we have been throughout this project a student of these organizations in our advisory board, and I'm just excited to hear from them today. So I think I'm passing over to Ron.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Ron Williams, and I am a faculty member at Coppin State University in Baltimore, Maryland, and I am a member of the UMA board and academic advisor on the Industry and Inclusion Project. And I want to welcome everybody to our conversation today about advancing equity and inclusion in manufacturing, credentialing, and technology. I want to thank Andy and Katie for setting the context for us in a very effective way. So I will identify the members of our panel this morning, as well as, and after they have been identified, each panelist will have 5 minutes to make a statement and give you a little bit more context about their organizations if they like. And then we will conclude with, we will have some more open discussion, conversation around some questions that will be raised. And then we'll conclude with a couple of questions from the chat area. So feel free to put questions there, and we will address a few of them, as many as time will allow toward the end of the discussion. But we have a wonderful panel, a great panel. So I want to welcome Dr. Keenan Grinnell, and he's the Executive Director of Manufacturing Diversity Institute and President and CEO of Grinnell Group LLC, and Montez King, Executive Director of NIMS, Jackie Mickstein, a talent strategist with the LIFT organization, one of Manufacturing USA's many institutes across the country. Elizabeth Stuck, the head of engagement and workforce development at MXD, another one of Manufacturing USA's many institutes. And of course, Andy Stetner, who has introduced himself, and Katie Stanton from UMA. So that is our esteemed panel. We're looking forward to a lively exchange and a lot of learning during this session. So I want to welcome everybody once again. But as has been mentioned in much of the promotional literature leading up to this event and in our context setting statements, advanced technology such as automation and 3D printing and artificial intelligence are changing the skill requirements for living wage careers in manufacturing. And the jobs in manufacturing can still be accessed without a college degree, but the requirements are changing. And the workforce demands, the human capital demands created by advancing technology in an ever increasing way are really making it a little bit more complex in terms of accessing those jobs. And we want to make sure that we are discussing it from the right mix of education, training, and community support that will allow these pathways to be accessible for as many people as possible. So each of our panelists will have 5 minutes to address the initial question, and they can include information about their organizations if they like. But here is my initial question, and we will begin with Jackie Mickstein. And the question is, what are the opportunities and challenges you see for equity in manufacturing technology and credentialing.
Thank you so much, Ron. So I'd like to start by just giving a little bit of a background about LIFT as an organization, because some folks might not be familiar. LIFT is one of 15 national manufacturing innovation institutes around the country. Each of us is focused on a unique emerging advanced manufacturing technology area. But we're all really working together toward the same goal, which is to improve U.S. manufacturing competitiveness by leading major research and development collaboration projects, and also by accelerating the development of advanced manufacturing workforce by really trying to align educational with industry needs. And so LIFT is headquartered in Detroit, and we focus specifically on the advancements of smarter manufacturing processes, materials, and systems. And you can go to the next slide, I'm sorry. And by combining, again, talent with technology development, it really helps us understand how this shift toward smarter manufacturing processes are going to require, as Ron said, new skills development, new competencies, and frankly, new talent development strategies and solutions to prepare the workforce to get us there. And so in that vein, in the 6 years that LIFT has been around, we've supported a portfolio of more than 40 different replicable, scalable, and sustainable education and workforce development programs, really prepared are designed to prepare individuals for success in advanced manufacturing and this coming fusion of technology. And that work really culminated in a subset of some of our kind of signature programming that we're working on deploying throughout the country. The first is called Ignite Mastering Manufacturing, which is a 3-year high school curriculum featuring a hybrid of virtual course materials and simulations, coupled with hands-on learning that prepares students to master those emerging manufacturing materials, technologies, processes, and systems. And we actually developed that curriculum in partnership with 2 of our fellow institutes, America Makes, which was mentioned earlier on the call, and MXD, who you'll hear from in just a moment, to really help students at a high school level be able to start understanding some of these emerging technology areas that we focus on. We also have a signature program, also hybrid, leveraging that virtual curriculum and hands-on performance-based training called Operation Next, which is actually designed for transitioning military to be able to earn the credentials required for some of the most in-demand manufacturing jobs, CNC operations, industrial technology maintenance, welding, and just added robotics, so that they can earn credentials, secure jobs before they even leave the service. And most recently, we've seen that this really accelerated hybrid model actually is really highly relevant to civilians as well. So we're in the process of scaling that program to not just 9 new bases military bases across the United States, but we're also opening up that model and piloting it to train civilians who have been displaced by the COVID-19 pandemic in Detroit and also in Pittsburgh. And so we're actually taking both of these learning models and deploying them right now in our LIFT Learning Lab in Detroit. And you can go to the next slide. I keep forgetting about the slides. I'm so into this. But we are... So we opened last year an innovation or a learning lab within our innovation facility in Detroit as a state-of-the-art learning environment that features industry standards-based real-world manufacturing equipment, along with this curated instructional programming that really is meant to be a bit of a demonstration of how we think advanced manufacturing training can and should be done as we start to figure out how to prepare people for these emerging technologies. And so to answer Ron's question about opportunities and challenges related to increasing diversity, particularly utilizing credentials, I have to say we've been very intentional in aligning all of our programming to nationally portable, standards-based, industry-recognized credentials. And in the case of Operation Next, which I mentioned earlier, we've actually aligned our programs to result in American Welding Society, NIMS, and are currently working on SOCA credentials, which stands for Smart Automation Certification Alliance. We think these credentials are a really helpful tool especially in the context of some of these emerging smart manufacturing technologies that are not quite ubiquitous yet, because they help to identify and validate the skills that are needed. Because in some cases, employers who are starting to infuse these in their operations, they themselves are kind of new to this and don't necessarily understand the competency and the skills that they need to look for in a workforce. And so by leveraging the work that's being done by some of these third-party credentialing bodies, it's a nice way to be able to come up with a standard set of competencies and skills that will be required so that we can ensure that our training ultimately prepares individuals for success in those fields. So we think that's a really great opportunity to from an emerging technology perspective. And also, we've been intentional about aligning our programs to these credentials because our assumption, I will say, is that we see them as an on-ramp for individuals who frankly are disadvantaged by the traditional degree recognition paradigm. They're much faster to learn to earn than a traditional degree, oftentimes much more cost effective, and frankly, just a way to show that an individual just didn't take a course and earn a certificate, but they really are competency based. So it demonstrates that they have the skill sets needed to be a job or to do the job well. But there are some significant challenges to that assumption, though. And this isn't necessarily specific to credentials themselves, but while they may very well be a good way to get a foot in the door, a concern that we have is, do they potentially limit individuals who just have a credential in their career advancement opportunities because they don't have that traditional degree? I think we still have some work to do in understanding how industry uses credentials for career advancement consideration, and more broadly for hiring. I think a big challenge is kind of the elephant in the room when we talk about credentials is, to what extent does industry really recognize and value them? We've absolutely seen evidence that some employers look for credentials in their hiring and promotion processes. We know it kind of instinctually why they're beneficial, but it's still not, the recognition isn't still ubiquitous for some reason. So I think we still need to gain a better understanding and do some work to understand how employers use credentials in their hiring and promotion practices, and understand how to drive that recognition and value proposition for them, so that we're using them as a tool to create these pathways for a diverse talent pool versus inadvertently creating more barriers for individuals who are utilizing them as a career advancement opportunity. So I'd like to then pass over to Liz, my colleague at MXD, to share a little more about their organization.
Perfect. Thanks, Jackie, and good morning. And thank you for the opportunity to participate today. Like Lyft, MXD is part of the Manufacturing USA Network. So we are one of those 15 institutes around the country that you heard Jackie mention. Each of us focused on a different area of advanced manufacturing technology, but all of us committed to advancing US manufacturing competitiveness through the adoption of these technologies. MXD stands for Manufacturing Times Digital. And as mandated by the Department of Defense, we are the Institute for Digital Manufacturing, as well as the National Center for Cybersecurity and Manufacturing. We're looking at how manufacturing lifecycle can be improved through applications of a lot of the technologies that fall under that Industry 4.0 umbrella. And we're asking ourselves questions and examining things like, how does the use of data and data analytics improve a manufacturer's ability to make real-time decisions? How will that ability then result in increased output, increased efficiencies, decreased costs? So in addition to this focus on digital, we have been charged with addressing the increasing threat of cyber attacks on the manufacturing sector. The manufacturing sector is the most vulnerable sector when it comes to cyber attacks, more so than finance, more than healthcare. with 35% of all cyber attacks happening against manufacturers. The picture you're seeing on the slide right now is a picture of our factory floor. We are located in Chicago, Illinois on Goose Island, and we occupy about 100,000 square foot facility there. About a third of that is our factory floor. We serve nationally, not just in the Chicago region, with about 300 members from around the country. And we use this factory floor to do a lot of our experimentation. We and our partners have test beds and demonstrations set up across the factory floor where we are testing things out, piloting, validating, demonstrating, and generally learning about digital and cybersecurity for manufacturing technologies. If you don't mind, we'll go to the next slide. So my role at MXD is to lead our workforce development program, which we call MXD Learn. It's a relatively new program. We'll hit our 2-year anniversary in March of 2021. And we have sort of had the luxury of, I've been with the Institute for almost 6 years now, and we have had the luxury of learning about the challenges and opportunities in technology and R&D, and how we can apply those lessons learned to the development of a workforce program. So at the outset of our workforce development program, we set 3 key pillars that sort of guide the programming we do. The first is that all of our work has to be industry-led. Our objective is to address this massive skills gap that's facing manufacturing. You heard Katie mention it before, 2.4 million jobs left open by 2029 due to a skills shortage. So as we're looking at workforce programming, they have to have industry participation and validation to ensure that anyone who would be going through any kind of training or skills development programming has a clear pathway or set of pathways to a job that addresses a manufacturing industry gap. The second pillar we're looking at is that our workforce programs are community driven. We have seen some very strong manufacturing workforce programs fail because they're done in sort of a silo. And we believe and have seen evidence of the most successful workforce programs flourish when there's a community approach to solving the problem. An example of this would be the high school program that we run, which Jackie mentioned, Ignite. We run this program in Northern Illinois. And in order to set it up, we worked with the high school, but we also worked with the economic development group in the region, the community college down the street, and regional small manufacturers. So we're building a community effort by taking this high school program, creating dual enrollment at the community college, funding apprenticeships at that community college with industry to de-risk that initial investment for small and mid-sized manufacturers to test out apprenticeships, and building those career pathway and opportunities for individuals while also addressing the skills need for manufacturers in the region. We feel very strongly that this type of collaboration is necessary if we're going to develop strong manufacturing workforce programs. And the third pillar of our programming is a decision made to focus our programs on serving the underserved. With this looming skills gap of 2.4 million, we are not going to be able to address the need solely by upskilling those who are already in the pipeline. We really need to look outside of the usual places to find new talent and introduce people to opportunities advanced manufacturing careers present. We need to think outside the box and find talent in places that we really wouldn't expect it. And as we explore the skills needed for the future of work in manufacturing, we're finding that having a background in manufacturing is actually less important than having the ability and the willingness to be a continuous student, to use critical thinking skills, to have some kind of digital or technology experiences that a lot of young people have just naturally by the way we work as a society now. So we find that someone who is willing to learn and relearn as technology advances has much better opportunity for some of these future work roles than those who are already in the manufacturing pipeline. If we could go to the next slide. Wanted to address the question that Dr. Williams presented at the top of the webinar, which is, what are the challenges and opportunities? And particularly, we are thinking about those from the technology standpoint. I will say there are a significant number of challenges, but I do believe that they still outweigh, that the opportunities still outweigh these challenges. So I'll start with a couple of the challenges and then go to the opportunities. And I think one of the biggest challenges we see is just access to programs and training. access to roadmaps or pathways, blueprints to identify what next and where to go from here, access to information about job opportunities, the future of work, career pathways, and access to financial support for programs to cover the cost of training, whether it's for the individual or the employer. I think the other challenge that is making it difficult for workers, future workers, and employers alike is the lack of consistency. There are lots of manufacturing skills programs across the country, and some of them are really good, really strong, but it is really hard to know where to start, what to focus on, and where to go from there. I think there is a need for a more comprehensive approach to manufacturing skills development, a blueprint for a region that will allow that community to rally around an effort, rather than requiring an individual company to try and solve the problem alone, or worse, an individual to try and figure it out on their own. But as I said, I think the opportunities do outweigh the challenges. There are, when we look at the future of work, and we have spent a lot of time doing this at MXD Learn, we have developed 2 resources that identify nearly 400 different roles that are the future of work in digital and cybersecurity for manufacturing. And when we look at the future of work in these areas, it's really exciting. It's advanced technologies that utilize things like augmented reality and artificial intelligence. It's robots and automation doing some of the more mundane tasks, leaving humans to focus on the more exciting work of developing and programming. But it's also not built from the same set of skills that have historically been prioritized by manufacturers. So not having worked in manufacturing previously does not preclude an individual from having a future in manufacturing. And as I said, in fact, we're finding that cutting edge manufacturers are looking for people who bring a vastly different skill set than the ones we would have expected to see. And the rapidly changing technology landscape, while providing or creating some challenges, also opens the door for individuals from a variety of different backgrounds to explore careers in manufacturing. And I think perhaps the most important is the unequivocal need that we have to find workers for manufacturing. This 2.4 million number for the skills gap comes from an even larger number of 4.6 million manufacturing jobs to fill between now and 2028. And frankly, we expect that number to rise as the increase in cyber attacks creates a demand for workers in cybersecurity for manufacturing. As I said, these jobs, they require different skill sets than we've previously seen. Employers are looking for things, computer skills, critical thinking, digital skills, and talents far different than what we've seen in the past, which creates an opportunity for a whole new workforce to jump into the field of manufacturing. So with that, I'll pause there. I'm looking forward to the conversation today, and I will pass this over to Dr. Keenan Grinnell.
Good morning, everyone. I want to, first of all, thank the Urban Manufacturing Alliance for giving me an opportunity to participate in this conversation. One of the things that we are significantly excited about in terms of the Manufacturing Diversity Institute is, 1, our origins, number 2, the charge that we feel that we have been given to be a vehicle towards opportunities within underserved manufacturing. And number 3, just being a major advocacy organization, because one of the things that we've realized over the years is that we cannot engage in the type of work that we're doing in a silo and all to ourselves. So MDI is actually an outgrowth of a project through the University of Wisconsin Colleges and Extension. At that time, the chancellor of that particular system asked me to participate with engaging high-profile African-American churches inside of the Milwaukee metropolitan area, in looking at doing 2 things. 1, developing economic development corporations, and number 2, asking those economic development corporations to think about light manufacturing opportunities. So once the project was over with, I had what you would call an intellectual fire in the belly to continue the program. So I actually started MDI as a nonprofit organization. I didn't just all of a sudden do the paperwork to get things started. I actually did a lot of business intelligence related work on the front end. And part of that was to float a white paper, not only within the Milwaukee metro area, but at the state level in terms of various state agencies that would later come behind the startup effort to actually financially support and provide resources to that, but also take that white paper and float it at the national level, even to the point whereby I flew to Washington, D.C. to meet with a top level official within the Economic Development Administration, who after reading the white paper coined this effort as a national demonstration project. And since that particular coinage, we have tried to operate as such. A couple of things that I'm exceptionally proud of. I'm proud of our board. We have an excellent board of directors. Our board chair is probably the foremost scholar in terms of African-American entrepreneurship on the planet, Dr. John Sibley Butler at the University of Texas at Austin. We have several other board members. One of the things that I'm proud about with MDI is that we have about 5 PhDs that are connected with the Institute. And I'm not just talking about with the local higher ed institutions. I'm talking about individuals that are scattered across the country, and some who have had experience in terms of the White House Office of Technology, one that is actually responsible for economic development for an entire state. In the Deep South, another individual who is actually the dean of a brand new science, technology, engineering, and math program at a very recognized community college. So we have some breadth and depth in terms of being able to deliver. And so MDI is in business to ensure that individuals from underserved communities are successful, not only in manufacturing careers, but also in manufacturing enterprise opportunities. So let's go to the next slide. Just wanted to sort of acquaint you with some of our programs. One is that of a manufacturing idea challenge. And so that was our initial program, and that program is an offshot from that early University of Wisconsin colleges and extension program. And basically what it is a scaled down business canvas model approach to enticing individuals in underserved communities to think about manufacturing as an enterprise opportunity. And the way it works is basically an accelerator without walls. But the most important features of the program is to assign that manufacturing entrepreneur with someone who would mentor them, plug them into various networks, and then begin to help and assist them with the scaling up and the scaling out of their enterprise. The second program, which I'm very excited about, is the Innovative Veterans Lab. Now, actually, it is a mirror image of the Manufacturing Idea Challenge. However, it's a focus on veterans. One is because there's a veteran that's on our board, and this individual is probably one of the most respected veterans that's involved in veteran entrepreneurship across the country. Matter of fact, he's a White House champion of change that was recognized during the Obama administration, and he's been involved in over 400 veteran enterprises across the country. A third program is that we realize that if we are going to grow underserved manufacturers, we have to be able to get them to look at export activities. Sadly to say that in terms of African-American manufacturing within the state of Wisconsin, I can only think of one individual that is actually exporting a product outside of the United States boundaries. And that is a sad statistic to share on a national basis, but it's a reality. I'm also the president of the 30th Street Corridor, which is about 880 industrial acres inside of inner city Milwaukee, that at one point in time was the heartbeat of all of manufacturing, not only in Milwaukee, but across the country. That corridor is home to well-known legacy manufacturers like A.O. Smith, Master Lock, as well as Harley Davidson. Right now, we are trying to revitalize that area with underserved manufacturing as perhaps the tip of the spear. Several years ago, we did a survey with close to the 100 businesses that we have in the quarter, in which a large percentage of those businesses are manufacturing operations. Sad to say that not one of those businesses is an African-American manufacturer. However, 25% of those businesses are actually exporting, with other businesses wanting to engage in the exporting game. What does that mean? They know that there are markets outside of the United States. They understand that as they tap into those markets, that's going to increase revenue. It's going to increase productivity. It will also potentially increase the growth of the organization, as well as provide sustainable job opportunities that will help communities within themselves grow. Our signature program, in which we are very excited about, is the Cafe, the Innovation Cafe program. One of the things that we recognized early on in the ball game was that until MDI surfaced its head, there were very little discussions on a local, regional, state, or national basis about underserved manufacturing. We couldn't find a single entity that were bringing people together through all types of sectors and networks to talk about penetrating the manufacturing industry with underserved talent as well as enterprises. So we established the Innovation Cafe on National Manufacturing Day, in which we were probably one of the first minority programs nationwide to actually engage in a program of any national noteworth during National Manufacturing Day. One of our most profound cafes took place in 2016 at the Digital Manufacturing Design and Innovation Institute, which is now M×D. We had individuals there from the Department of Energy, the Department of Defense. We had local administrative types with the city of Chicago there, like the person that is responsible for the Treasury unit in terms of the city of Chicago. We had participation from Commerce in terms of the Minority Business Development Agency. We had regional leaders there. We had participation from some of the most noteworthy technical colleges in the area. We had scholars there. It was a national program that really opened up the floodgates as it related to things that are taking place as it relates to underserved manufacturing. One of the things that we really wanted to have a conversation about was the taxonomy that M×D had actually produced. What was curious to me was that if these were going to be the jobs of the future, we wanted to make sure that underserved communities were uniquely aware of these opportunities, but also to be in a readiness position to be able to take advantage of these opportunities. Because of our efforts, we became a 2016 Small Business Administration Growth Accelerator Competition Award winner, and we were the only 2016 award winner within the state of Wisconsin. Next slide, please. What I wanted to bring to this opportunity this morning was not just a conversation about what MDI does, but the potential impact that MDI can have on a national and global basis. There has been talk for over a decade now in terms of the potentiality of reshoring. So we have developed a concept that is called the Reshoring, Reinvestment, and Regrowth Initiative. It has two major pieces to it. One is the entire approach in terms of how we would go about doing this. Sadly to say, the current administration has done a lot of talk about bringing manufacturing back to American shores. And there is some conversation about the new President-elect administration talking about a major focus on manufacturing, as well as bringing manufacturing back to American shores. However, no one, to our knowledge, has yet put together a package of ideas that will do it and make sure that underserved communities are front and center in terms of the benefits that should be accrued. So one of the things that we know that has worked is that research is exceptionally important to any type of initiative. So what we plan to do is take a business intelligence approach and look at all of the potential opportunities in terms of reshoring here within the United States in terms of supply chain opportunities. We will then take that research and drop it into what we call a map of opportunities, utilizing the skill sets of data scientists to be able to plot from a graphical standpoint of view all of the areas within the country where reshoring, especially in terms of underserved participation, stands the greatest potentiality to be able to surface. And then we will take that information and work with minority business enterprises that are at a readiness level to not only enter the manufacturing game from a startup perspective, but look at existing businesses that might want to rethink, retool their business model, and then take that and go into manufacturing as a new revenue source, and then be able to say what, Ron?
I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off, but I want to get to Montez, and then we'll share more detail on this during the open discussion, if you don't mind.
Okay, all right, not a problem. Go ahead.
Montez, if you would prepare to give us an overview, and then we'll come back to the open discussion and get back to the reshoring. Thank you.
Great. Hello, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to be a part of the panel. And my name is Montez King, Executive Director of NIMS, and I would like to talk to you about some of our smart solutions that tie into the objectives of this initiative. So if we can go to the next slide. So just an overview of what we do. It's really simplified. Most may identify with NIMS historically as a credentialing organization. However, we refer to what we do as validating performance with practical experiences that reflect what employees will face on the job. This is key for all employers. That's what they're looking for, performance. It's not our products that we're selling. It's can you help them improve performance? And if your products are solutions for them, then it's good for your organization. Now, how we do it is through our SMART solutions. Now, SMART stands for adapting to the velocity of technology. It's moving at NASCAR pace. You know, it's so fast. And so our solutions have to be adaptable to that. It cannot, if you introduce a new solution, if it cannot keep up with the velocity of technology, it starts to decay very quickly. So it also stands for flexibility. Most customers want, or manufacturers need, a tremendous amount of flexibility to be sustainable. So those are the two primary definitions for SMART. Now that is broken down into what we call SMART standards, SMART training principles, and SMART performance measures. Through all pillars, they all have that adaptability and that flexibility. Today, we'll focus more on SMART standards and SMART training principles. We'll tie in further into the presentation, we'll tie in more specifically of how diversity and equity and inclusion falls into these SMART solutions. First, I will just give you the framework of how SMART standards and SMART training principles work. So if we can go to the next slide. So with SMART standards, we had to rethink how standards are developed within our industry and all industries for that matter, because of what we call, or I call, the complexity gap. The complexity gap is when the velocity of technology increases or is moving at such a fast pace that it's impossible for one person to master an entire occupation. Now, companies have been dealing with this for a long time, and how they've dealt with that is through roles. If you look at the narrow, gray rectangular shape, you can see those are roles. So companies or organizations define these roles within their workforce for what they do, what they need to perform on the job. But when it comes to the occupation, there are many different duties, or that's synonymous to responsibilities within an occupation, but not every organization requires those duties. And even if they do, they're broken down into these different roles. However, when we look at training historically, it's typically this, you're looking for, or you're thinking about historically how there's a master mechanic, or there's a journey person, or an artisan, depending on what country you're from. And that's how we thought about it for many years. But because of the complexity gap, we can no longer train in that fashion. So when we talk about how the organizations operate, they operate through roles. But when we talk about training itself, is typically thought of as an occupation. Well, those don't mix. So your training and your standards have to adapt to how the companies operate today. So we've overhauled our framework to create SMART standards, which allows organizations to build roles. It's like Build-A-Bear. If anyone has kids on this call, you go in a Build-A-Bear store, you can build a bear. You take, different little items and you build what you need. The duties are those ornaments that you can add to your roles, and then you can define what you need in your organization. And regardless of what duties you select, you're always standardized, because the standardization is at the duty level rather than the occupation level. And so now if we go to the next slide, we'll look at how do you train. So if we go to the next slide, we have SMART training principles. Works the same way, same framework. However, instead of having roles and then the occupation within the box, we have behaviors in a box, and then we have principles. So the principles are what you accept within your organization when it comes to training. And the behaviors are the practical ways you carry out those training objectives. Now, when you accept the principle, there are certain behaviors that are associated with those principles. And so if there could be 10 different behaviors generally for a specific principle, but you can still define the intensity of that principle for the maximum return on investment for your organization. And so the behaviors are defined as something that's very practical, something that you can implement, and something that you can measure. And then the principles are just at a higher level, categorizing those behaviors. So this is the framework for how we're dealing with the velocity of technology. And then it also includes the diversity, equity, and inclusion. For certain principles, they fall within that category. As we go into the deeper questions in more detail, you will see how this framework applies to our DEI initiative. Thank you.
Okay, thank all of our panelists. That was very informative. And now we will transition over into a more open conversation and dialogue about some of the specifics that you mentioned. And I also want to acknowledge that Jackie Mickstein has a 12 o'clock hard stop. So I will give her certainly an opportunity to share before she has to leave us at 12. But the first question that I would like to throw out to the entire group is, how is technology changing the qualifications, and how do we leverage that change for a more inclusive sector? It's changing, but how do we leverage the change so that we can be more inclusive? And that's for anyone, but I certainly want to give Jackie first bite at the apple.
Thanks, Ron. And actually my 12 o'clock did get pushed a little, so I can stay on a little bit longer, unfortunately. I think that Montez and Liz both touched on this, that, the nature of roles in an advanced manufacturing environment are changing pretty drastically to move away from kind of that traditional, this is my job, I do one thing and that's it, where it's becoming much more, combined, cross-sectional, so that, an individual has to be much more multifunctional. And that's really where we developed that, Ignite multi-skill technician training to be able to address that. And I think one of the advantages of that that, which I think Liz pointed out, is that it's really, it's new, it's a new concept, it's new skills, and that really provides an opportunity for folks who haven't necessarily been working in an advanced manufacturing, type of role, that it's more about the, how they're approaching work and understanding that they're going to have to constantly, reinvigorate their skills throughout their entire career, versus necessarily having that, foundational, this is how advanced manufacturing has traditionally been done. So I think that's a really exciting opportunity to attract, new people into these roles who haven't necessarily been working in this space in the past, or haven't seen advanced manufacturing as an opportunity for them.
Would anyone else like to tackle that? The change is happening. How do we leverage the change and the fact that there's so much disruption to be more inclusive in our hiring practices and so forth?
Ron, I would like to actually go back and address the same question that Liz did. And I want to tell a small story. About 3 years ago, one of my incubator colleagues does a lot of business in South Korea. And that person is actually probably one of the leading business individuals that's reached out to South Korea to try to attract South Korean investments. So that individual is going to bring some South Korean manufacturers to the Milwaukee area. But that person told me 3 things. They said, Keenan, if I'm going to bring them to the 30th Street corridor, residents in the corridor need to understand 3 things. One is that it's going to demand educational pursuit for people wanting to do business and come to work with those companies. That means that you will have to take at least 1 course at Milwaukee Area Technical College or Gateway Technical College down in Racine. The second thing is that you'll have to be committed to continuous education. Just because you take that 1 course, you will have to be willing to understand that education is going to be the sustainability factor in terms of your maintenance of job security within that particular industry. And third, you have to tackle it from a professional career scenario. You have to be professional career minded. That job opportunity is a professional career, and you must treat it as such. It has networks, it has requirements for qualification and credentialing scenarios. And so just like any other profession, you have to stay on top of that profession. So those are the 3 things that was shared with me, and it sticks with me as I counsel and outreach to other individuals as it relates to talent and workforce opportunities.
Okay. Anyone else? How do we leverage the moment in terms of the change and the advancing technology and the disruption that's happening to be more inclusive in our practices?
This is Montez. I can only go off of my own experience more accurately. And I have to reflect back when I was an apprentice, learning a trade. And one of the problems that I was dealing with was we had the diversity by including me into a shop where there was only one of me, myself, where I was very unique. But the key was experience. So I was in the stadium. I was in the building, but I still faced the experience, and so I was passed on. So I had to reverse engineer my experiences so that I can get them. I had to find my own projects, find my own ways to increase my portfolio or my resume. And so when that's from the individual that's actually in the job. Sometimes you have to be creative, but for the employer side of it, it's going to go back to validating through experience, validating performance with practical experiences that will face what that employees will face on the job. And you have to create these behaviors in your training that ties everyone in together. So it's not that you're just in the building, but it's also that everyone has to go through this process. And when you do that, you not only have the diversity, but you also have the equity within whatever you're looking for. So One is getting through the door, creating experiences for yourself. Also with the employers, making sure that that same experience is given, not just in a policy, but your training behaviors has to support that. So we can get into that in more detail. There were some other questions. I don't want to go into too much detail, but I just wanted to give you a high level answer to your question.
Okay,
Can I
thank you.
follow on to that?
Sure, go ahead, Liz.
Because I think that in line with Montez's comments, I think certainly there's the how do we address this for the worker, but trying to reach individual workers is sort of chipping away at the problem. I think one of the things that we're trying to think about as an institute is how do we change the mindset of the employer? How do we get the employers thinking differently? Because it's going to be, while there's still some chipping away there, it's a little bit more, or reaching a little bit more of an audience faster. And we're I think getting at least where MXD has seen some of the root of the issue. When we took a new advanced manufacturing curriculum to a high school, we didn't really anticipate that high schoolers would be that excited about a manufacturing program, but we were completely wrong. And we had 150 students voluntarily sign up to be a part of the program. They saw the opportunity and they had the interest. It was the employers that we really have to work with more to help them think about this. There's a lot of technology out there that needs to be considered. How are you considering which technology is right for your organization, right? You're not going to apply every Industry 4.0 technology there is. Which ones are the right fit for you? And when you know which ones are the right fit for you, how do you bring the right people in and the right skill sets in to be able to actually use those technologies? There's a lot of examples of companies bringing in new technology, and there's no one there who knows how to use it. So it just sits there. How are we encouraging employers to think about both the technology from a different point of view and then the people they bring in? How are you working with your HR department, if you have one, or the individual who is running HR for you, to say, what do we really need? What kinds of backgrounds are we really looking for? Does somebody need to have a bachelor's degree? How do we think about this? We have to shift that mentality from a mindset of abundance when it comes to the workforce to something where we say, what are the skills that we're actually looking for here based on where we're trying to go? And I think, and that to the point Montez was making, that then flows down into what kinds of experiences are you providing for either the current workers, or what kinds of experiences are you providing for the future workers by looking around your community and opening your doors and creating both the opportunity for exposure, but also investing in that community for the training opportunities. So I think that there's certainly an awareness that needs to happen in the place of the future worker, but even more so, how are we engaging employers to help them understand how to set themselves up well for success?
Okay, so that's I'm hearing a few different components. There's the potential employees, the young people that were presented with an opportunity that were certainly very eager. They saw an opportunity, even perhaps the attention of someone asking them what did they want to do, but also the technology piece, the type of technology, and changing the behavior or the culture in some of the employer environments. How do we bring those three together? What is the general approach to solving those problems? Can someone give me some specific examples? Anybody?
This is Montez. I can take a stab at that. So I have to give an example to show how it ties in so that we can be more practical about what we're saying. I was working with an organization that they're trying to change their culture, and changing your culture is by changing your behaviors and then looking at the results of the perspectives from your workforce, and that's how you change your culture. And one area was how do we get equality or equity in our training and delivery for, you have someone on the floor who they fit the profile for the job for whatever anyone creates a norm for that, their own norm, and they fit the profile, and you just deliver your training differently. than another person who's, not in that profile that's expected. So they're a little different, and the delivery changes. Right? Even if you come in with good intentions, the delivery changes, and that changes the experience. And so how do we tie that together? So we created methods that would change the behaviors of the company. So how we did that is we made the trainers performers in a stakeholder environment. Not only, we normally look at the trainee as the performer, but not the trainer. Right? So the trainer became a performer and the trainee became a performer. And say, practically, how do we do that? We made training, the trainer success, synonymous with the trainee success. So if the trainee gets something right, the trainer got it right. So now you're creating those mentorship, you're creating that relationship, you're creating that teamwork so that they're working together, because my success is tied to your success. So those are like real practical behaviors that you can put in place to change your culture. It just, over time, it just is a constitutional change. It just, your trainers just start thinking differently, because they know my success as a trainer is synonymous to your success. So that's just one way to create a stakeholder environment within your culture.
Okay, very good. That's certainly a very practical example of a solution that I do believe will move the needle. Let's, Keenan, if you would, can you speak to how your organization addresses disparities and access to careers in technology? You mentioned reshoring during your initial presentation, but how is your organization addressing the disparities in access and adoption, I would say, because even thinking about the communities, underserved communities, coming into some of the environments and what that experience is coming into the environment. How does your organization approach that?
Thank you, Ron. One of the ways, and I think I might have mentioned it earlier, is that we consider ourselves to be not only a think and do tank, but part advocacy organization as well. And so from an advocacy perspective, we are, how can I say this, the bullhorn in terms of making sure that individuals have access to opportunities, having access to networks. We have been known to grab one of our clients by the hand and making sure that that individual is able to penetrate unpenetrable opportunities. Case in point, there are 3 sectors that are driving the economy of Southeast Wisconsin: energy, power, and control, food and beverage, and water technology. You would be hard pressed to find any underserved manufacturers that are involved in those particular 3 sectors. However, we have not only networks and connections inside those 3 sectors, we have worked vigorously to be able to access entrepreneurs into those 3 unpenetrable sectors. In terms of adoption, in terms of working with new entrepreneurs, we make them realize that the digitization of their manufacturing process is crucial in terms of their future success, in terms of their future ability to be competitive. So technology adoption is something that we preach and teach and assist with on the front end. And that means if we have to point them in the direction of the technical college, if we have to point them in the direction of some type of 4.0 association, or point them in the direction of M times D, in which we often do, because I love that organization and I realize it's a gold mine for opportunity, especially within underserved communities. We point them directly to Chicago. And so that's what we do.
Okay.
Ron, could I add something to that?
Yes, please, Katie.
Thanks. And Keenan, this came directly from your presentation about, how you actually started. I think, Ron, your question was around, how do you help communities access and then adopt sort of these opportunities in manufacturing. And Keenan, when you were first talking, you were sharing that MDI was originally part of the UW extension system, and that they kind of tasked you with going and connecting faith communities, churches to manufacturing. And I wanted to pull on that thread because I think it's really important that as both employers, but also organizations like Lyft and MXD and the others in our industry and inclusion cohort who are dedicated to working not only with industry partners, but with higher ed, and then of course with communities and getting more people engaged, that these organizations and all of us on the call today think about those, what I would call like unexpected partners, right? Like you wouldn't necessarily say a church is where I'm going to find a bunch of people who are going, to really champion manufacturing. But we've seen in a couple cities, and I'm going to add Milwaukee and your work, Keenan, to this list, that's precisely an example of an entity that you might not originally go to, but that can be a really strong partner who has trust and to use the word, like a certain amount of credential or cred in the community, credibility in the community. So how can you think about those sort of adjacent partners like churches, like affordable housing developers or CDCs and other community-based groups to go to and to partner with, to bring, advocates and trainees and employees to the table alongside with your industry and your higher ed partners?
One of the things that I would like to piggyback on is actually give Katie and others an example of what she's just talking about. That initial project with UW Extension and colleges led to the development of a business plan for a food manufacturing operation for one of those churches. And most recently, they just developed a food enterprise incubator. Now individuals in that community that church serves actually has an opportunity to go into that incubator, test their food products, test the opportunity for them to be able to distribute it on a much larger scale, and to then start looking at places inside of inner city Milwaukee that they can then set up their own enterprise for manufacturing purposes. So, there is a direct link to these type of small network opportunities that Katie just mentioned. And I wanted to provide you with that example because we did the business plan and we are exceptionally proud of the fact that, we were at the beginning of this great opportunity.
Yeah, that's a great example of the interinstitutional connections that need to happen, because even with the technology adoption, in one model that I'm thinking of, ease of use and perceived value are really important. So when the communities are experiencing perceived value, they are much more likely to adopt and exposing them to the opportunities. But here's a question for everybody, and those are great examples, the one that Montez shared and one that Kenny shared, and Liz's contribution. But how do we scale these examples in such a way that it has an impact on credential-based training and diversity, equity, and inclusion, keeping that in mind, keeping it inclusion in mind, equity in mind, but how do we scale these kinds of examples so that we can really make a difference? And anyone can jump in and address that.
I was just waiting. If anyone wants to go in front, I'll take a stab at it, but anyone wants to go ahead of me? Okay.
Floor is yours.
Thank you. So one way I think we could scale this is, and we're attempting to do it. We have the materials out, but self-evaluation and everyone on the same page. You're creating a level of standardization in those practical ways that you can disseminate through the culture. And so it's just like creating standards. And then from there, you're giving them a very quick and easy resource to self-evaluate where their principles are, what behaviors they're doing, what they desire versus what they're currently doing, and give them that gap analysis. And this is starting to educate them on what they can do to improve. And most will see that, wow, based on this evaluation, I'm far off from where I want to be. I may have it in my policies, but what I'm actually doing doesn't match. And so we need to make change. And then I think with the increase in performance, it's just going to have a widespread, it's going to just attack like a virus. It's just going to spread very fast and change the culture abroad. So that's one way I'm attempting to do it through NIMS, and all of us should take arms and really think about how we can work together and do it.
Thank you. Liz?
Yeah, I would add, I think there's this, there are organizations who are functioning at with a national scope out of mandate. There are organizations who are on the ground really networking with businesses in a community or in a region. And then there seems to be a breakdown a lot of times between those who are serving it sort of with that national viewpoint and those who are really on the ground, engaged day to day with those doing the work and manufacturing. And I think we need to find better ways. And I think that the Urban Manufacturing Alliance and the Century Foundation are looking at that. I think the Manufacturing USA Institutes are looking at that, but how are we connecting those programs in regions and communities that are seeing real success with workforce development training, with those programs who have that national focus to create awareness and to create some collaborations? I think also absent is a national comprehensive workforce development strategy for manufacturing. And in the absence of that, everyone is working to try and fill gaps, as you would expect, but we are still quite siloed in our efforts. So how do we create the blueprint for a national strategy and then look at the successes in communities and regions to figure out what can be scaled? What are the models that are working that should be expanded? How can those with the national mandate support that effort? And how can we make sure it rolls up into some kind of blueprint that we're all sort of looking at together to create some guidance? And I think, as I said before, there are a lot of really good programs out there functioning at a very local level. And organizations like MXD, and I won't necessarily speak for Lyft, but Jackie and I have talked about this quite a bit, which with the national mandate, how can we, rather than reinventing the wheel, how can we support those programs that are succeeding?
Okay, excellent. Well, that's a great segue into what I believe will be our last question before we go to the chat to get a couple of questions from our audience. But what are some of the national policy recommendations that would solidify your program at a policy level, meaning manufacturing and also equity inclusion? How do we make our manufacturing policy more inclusive? And that's for anybody who would like to address that before we go to the chat for questions.
I'd like to tackle that. And just being candid on the front end, if we go into scale, we have to go up to the mirror and take a hard look at what we're faced with. And manufacturing is just as susceptible to institutional and systemic racism as any other activity that people of color and people in underserved communities are faced with. This has been a nice conversation this morning, but the reality is that all of this that we are discussing has to combat institutional and systemic racism. So that needs to be a reality. Number two, I think Liz mentioned the concept of FBI. FBI is a very central barricade towards entry-level job opportunities. There are lifelong networks between manufacturing organizations and tech colleges that are gateways to workforce opportunities, but the same individuals from the same culture, the same communities have access and control to that. And that's not something I've heard of. That's something that I've actually visited and seen in terms of manufacturing shop floors. We also need to engage what I call at a national level civic entrepreneurism. And let me quickly say what that means. I mean the George Kosmeski model, who is actually responsible for the growth and enterprise and wealth development of Austin, Texas. In every community, there's a Michael Dell. and he mentored Michael Dell and created Austin, Texas as perhaps the #1 enterprise ecosystem in the entire country. That means science, technology, and economic development are the variables in a wealth creation equation. And Ron, you will appreciate this. We have to engage the historically Black colleges and universities. They are front and center in terms of creating wealth, creating middle-class opportunities for Black folk. That is not a network that should go unrecognized and not involve them in this type of work. Also, there's an Africa connection. African entrepreneurs have figured out manufacturing. We need to bring African manufacturing to our inner city areas in terms of available industrial sites that will create jobs, that will create investment, that will create perhaps supply opportunities right there on the site. We need to expose underserved manufacturers to the National Network Manufacturing Institutes. I can assure you that 90% of the African-American community in the United States has no clue of who these 15 institutes are. Several years ago, when M times D had their national startup celebratory event, the local alderman who that 100,000 square foot facility sits on got up to the podium, and he was asking more questions than he was articulate a vision in terms of how to leverage that huge asset in his aldermanic district. It just almost blew me away. We also need to expose our communities to the National Institute of Standards and Technology, as well as the Manufacturing Extension Partnership. These are massive nationwide institutions that have global reach, have access to networks and opportunities. Unless we bring all of these institutes and organizations to the table to progressively move forward on this type of initiative, we'll be here 10 years from now with the same webinar format, just different panel members talking about the exact same things without any movement whatsoever. So that's it for me from today.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have anything to add to that before we go to the chat for questions? If not, I'm going to ask if Amanda would give us a couple of questions from the chat area before we close.
Sure, thanks, Ron. We got a lot of great questions here, but this one more on the credential side of the discussion. While there's work being done to design accessible credentials, the offering is still being offered predominantly through the higher ed track. How can accessibility for these programs be expanded outside of those institutions to encompass those who might already have been left behind by the education system?
So I can answer it, or I can wait.
No, go right ahead.
Okay. All right, just more people that's a really extremely good question. Part of the strategic plan through NIMS is to you have many people who have the experience in any particular area, but they don't have documentation or credentials. So I'm thinking this is addressing that question of how do I have access to demonstrate my skills. So the framework for credentialing for many organizations is I'm going to design my learning material and I'm going to tie it to a credential. And for you to earn a credential, you need to go through my learning material. So it's kind of like a monopoly there. So this is something where, you know, our framework is quite different. If it's a competency-based credential, you should be able to demonstrate your competencies without going through any type of particular training. Now, your framework should also have some type of discovery to determine if you go through the process and you don't have all of the skills that you need or the knowledge, then you can take that track and now you know exactly what you need to do for training and go forth. So it should be the way that NIMS framework works it's the way it works for us is it's truly competency based. You should be able to demonstrate your competencies. So I'll say I agree with the person that wrote the question, And if you want to learn more about what we're trying to do to change the dynamics of credentialing, please contact me at nims-skills.org, or you can find my email on that website.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else like to weigh in on that question before we go to perhaps one more?
I think I would just add really quickly, Ron, that some of our other cohort members for the industry and inclusion cohort are working with credentials, but outside the paradigm of a community college or higher ed, and there are community-based groups who are either working perhaps in high schools or just to train adult, or young adult populations. So I don't think credentials only live in underneath the house of a higher educational institution, and that other programs can also provide a framework for folks to earn credentials or learn other competencies.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's take one more question.
Great. So I think we've talked about the role of CBOs, community benefit organizations, but also the person was wondering about the role of local workforce boards and the role that they do play or should play in the referral, the recruitment process, as well as the willingness to support job seekers in placement and ensuring retention.
Anyone like to tackle that question?
I'll just say that I think, workforce boards are these, I look at them a lot as like these de-risking institutions on the side of the employer. So the more that workforce boards can understand the training programs that are happening in their communities and make those introductions and connections to their employer partners, and then also sort of be that de-risker in terms of providing financial support for on-the-job training, which they get through their WIOA and Department of Labor dollars. If they can sort of play that intermediary and connect all of the partners, I think that could be a really effective way for local workforce boards to help with both the referrals for job seekers to employers, but also the recruitment process.
Andy?
I was going to add that workforce boards need to make sure that they serve both the employer community and the community-based organizations. Often people won't have the requisite skills or background to even be able to take advantage of, Workforce Investment Act funded programs. So those kind of deep connections to pipeline-based programs and remembering not just paying organizations to place people, but also paying for the mentoring and coaching recruitment that's needed. And one thing throughout our research we talked about a lot was the need for incumbent worker training. Some of the training into, like Montes was talking about, people that might not fit the profile necessarily immediately for an advancement could benefit, from public support. Liz had mentioned that for employers to gain training. Workforce boards tend to focus on the unemployed and less so on the employed who have the chance to advance. That's something I know there's some way to corkscrew in the existing law, but we're looking for making it clearer when the law authorizing workforce boards comes up in 2021.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, we are at the end of our time. We want to be respectful of everyone's schedules and end on time, but this has been an incredible conversation, a very important conversation with a lot of valuable information. One of the models for social impact that I use in my work focuses on creating new knowledge, leaving artifacts, and making sure that the interinstitutional connections are made. And I think that this session has certainly checked all of those boxes. I want to thank the UMA, Urban Manufacturing Alliance, the Century Foundation, Lumina, all of our excellent panelists and the staff that helped to bring this to pass, and everybody who signed on and took advantage of the learning opportunity. We thank you for your time and look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.